In the silence of the woods, humans stop being humans. They become objects. Welcome to Keddie, California. April 12th, 1981. Look at this head. Smooth. Blank. Perfect. This is how the killer saw them. Not as a family, but as mannequins in a display case. Cabin 28 wasn't a home. It was a workshop. The killer didn't just take lives. He broke the toys. He stripped away their humanity, until only the porcelain shell remained. Tonight, ex-crime Noir simulates the night. The dolls were shattered. Watch the wax crack. Sheila Sharp returned home at 8 a.m. She opened the door and walked into a surrealist nightmare. Imagine seeing your mother, not as a person, but as a discarded prop on a stage. 3 figures on the floor, fully clothed, fully broken. Glenna Sue Sharp, in her yellow robe. John and Dana, in their flannel shirts and jeans. They looked like store mannequins, knocked over by a vandal. Stiff limbs pointing at the ceiling. Blank faces staring at nothing. The blood soaked into the wool and denim, turning the fabric heavy and black. Sheila stood there, a statue of shock, realizing that her creators had been turned into garbage. Look at the craftsmanship. The killer bound them over their clothes. Electrical cords wrapped tight around thick wool. Why take their clothes off when you can trap them inside the fabric? The hammer smashed the wax faces, but the bodies remained dressed. It was a mockery of decency. A chaotic scene posed with rigid precision. The knife bent against the ribs, tearing through layers of cotton to reach the hollow center. My perspective? The killer didn't want nudity. He wanted a tableau. He wanted them to look like they were frozen in the middle of a scream that never made a sound. Walk down the hall. The wax museum continues. 3 smaller figures in pajamas, lying in bed, covers pulled up to their chins. They are the silent observers. Perfect little mannequins that didn't wake up. How does a wax figure sleep through a hammer attack? It doesn't. It just watches. But count the figures. 1, 2, 3. Where is the 4th? Tina Sharp. The 12-year-old doll. She is missing from the set. Her clothes are gone. Her shoes are gone. The killer didn't break her here. He took her with him. He stole a piece of the exhibit to play with in the dark woods. Let's examine the tools of the trade. The killer didn't bring a gun. Guns are loud. Guns are quick. He brought a hammer and a steak knife. Look at the blade found at the scene. It was bent at a 90-degree angle. Do you understand the physics required to bend a steel kitchen knife like that? You have to strike a solid object like a rib cage or a hard plastic shell with the force of a hydraulic press. He didn't just stab the mannequins. He tried to carve through their synthetic cores. The hammer was used with the same ferocity, crushing the smooth, featureless heads until they caved in. This wasn't an assassination. It was a demolition project. He was breaking the furniture. Glenna Sue Sharp, the matriarch of the display. She was found covered with a yellow blanket. Why cover a mannequin after you break it? Is it remorse? Or is it compartmentalization? The killer smashed her faceless head, slit her throat through the plastic, and then tucked her in. Forensic analysis shows she moved after the attack. Or maybe she was moved. The blood spatter on the furniture tells a story of chaos. High-velocity impact. Droplets flying through the air like red paint flicked from a brush. But remember the silence. All this violence, all this thrashing of limbs, and the boys next door heard nothing. The simulation suggests the killer controlled the noise as tightly as he controlled the knife. Look at the positioning of John and Dana. The two male figures. They were bound together by their feet, electrical cords winding around their denim ankles like snakes. This indicates a struggle for dominance. The killer didn't just walk in and start swinging. He managed to subdue two able-bodied teenage mannequins. How? Was there a second intruder? Justin, the boy in the other room, later mentioned seeing two men in a dreamlike state. Two shadows moving in the dark, dismantling the dolls one by one. The medical tape used to bind them wasn't found in the house. The killer brought it with him. This was a premeditated kit, a toolbox designed for disassembly. And then, the final piece of the anatomy. The void. Tina Sharp's bed was empty, but her shoes were still there. Her jacket was still there. A 12-year-old girl doesn't walk out into the snowy woods, barefoot and coatless. She was carried. Imagine the killer, covered in the fluid of the other dolls, walking into this room. He looks at the sleeping boys. He ignores them. He selects Tina. He lifts her from the bed like a prize. Why her? Why take one piece of the set and leave the others intact? Was she the target all along? Or was she just a souvenir? While Sheila was screaming at the carnage in the living room, Tina was already gone, removed from the simulation. The anatomy of chaos is incomplete without her. Let's rewire the simulation. Go back to the bedroom. The boy, Justin. He wasn't just sleeping. He was recording. Years later, under hypnosis, the suppressed data surfaced. He didn't see monsters. He saw mechanics. Two men, he said. One with short hair, one with long hair. They were in the living room, dismantling the dolls with hammers. Justin watched the disassembly line from the shadows of his doorway. The killers were efficient. They didn't scream. They worked. The simulation suggests these weren't random drifters. They were comfortable in that space. They knew exactly how long it takes to break a human being. Shift focus to cabin 26. Just yards away. The proximity of evil. Meet the neighbors. Marty Smart and Bo Bubide. Marty was a volatile veteran with a short fuse and a cheating wife. He hated Sue Sharp. He believed Sue was convincing his wife to leave him. That's motive. A motive as old as time. A weak man blaming a woman for his own failures. And Bo? A con man with delusions of grandeur, aiming to impress his violent friend. The night of the murders, they were drinking nearby, fueling the rage. The simulation posits a simple theory. They didn't need to travel far to find their victims. They just walked next door. The arrogance of the guilty is staggering. The morning after the slaughter, while the wax figures were still cooling in cabin 28, Marty Smart walked into the crime scene. He didn't offer condolences. He offered a clue. He told police that someone had stolen his claw hammer. Why would you admit that? Unless you thought you were untouchable. Unless you were proud of your work. He practically handed the murder weapon to the police mentally, daring them to connect the dots. My perspective? That wasn't a slip-up. That was a flex. A predator marking his territory right under the noses of the sheepdogs. Bo Bubede was even louder. Reports say he bragged in bars about the killings. He wore his involvement like a cheap suit. Yet, the police did nothing. They interviewed Marty. They interviewed Bo. And they let them walk. They claimed Marty passed a polygraph, a machine notorious for being fooled by sociopaths. Why the inertia? Was it incompetence in a small town? Or was Cabin 26 protected? Rumors of drug connections and local corruption swirled like smoke. The simulation suggests the law didn't just fail. It looked the other way. The wax figures in Cabin 28 were screaming for justice, but the authorities were deaf by choice. Time is a cruel solvent in the simulation. 3 years passed. The cabin grew quiet. The blood dried on the floorboards. But the missing piece of the exhibit was still out there. 1984. Camp 18. 30 miles away from Ketty. A nowhere place where the woods keep their secrets tight. A bottle collector found it. Not glass. Not treasure. Porcelain. A small, smooth, white object protruding from the dirt. A skull fragment. Tina Sharp. The doll that was stolen. The killer didn't keep her as a souvenir forever. He discarded her when he was done playing. But here is the true horror of the simulation. The discovery wasn't an accident. It was choreographed. Just before the remains were found, the police received a call. Anonymous. A voice from the electronic void. The caller knew exactly where the bones were. "Look in Camp 18, the voice said. Why call 3 years later? Was it guilt rotting the circuit boards of his mind? No. This is Noir. It was arrogance. It was a game. The killer was reminding them that he was still out there, watching the pieces on the board. He didn't just hide the body. He planted it, waiting for the right season to let it bloom. The condition of the remains tells the final chapter of Tina's story. Scattered, gnawed by animals, bleached by the sun, the killer didn't bury the doll deep. He left her exposed to the elements. It was the final indignity. He took a pristine, clothed wax figure from the cabin and let the wilderness hammer it into dust. It was a statement. This is what I do to beautiful things. I break them, and then I let them rot. The simulation shows a profound disrespect for the form. He wanted nothing left but fragments that could never be put back together. My perspective? Connect the dots in the darkness. Who knew that remote area of the woods? Who had the survival skills to navigate 30 miles of dense terrain in the dark, carrying a body? Marty Smart, the veteran, the neighbor who lost his hammer. He knew that terrain like the back of his hand. He hunted there. The discovery of Tina didn't clear the board. It tightened the noose around the original suspects. The killer thought time and distance would erase the tracks. But in X-Crime Noir, time just makes the shadows longer. The wax figures in the cabin are gone, but the sculptor is still holding the knife. The simulation has a glitch. It's called the system. The initial investigation into Cabin 28 wasn't a pursuit of justice. It was a performance of incompetence. The police arrived at a wax museum of horrors and acted like tourists who lost their map. They contaminated the scene. They ignored witnesses. They let the prime suspects walk away. Why? Were they just bad at their jobs? Or were they paid to be bad? In X-Crime Noir, incompetence is often just a mask for complicity. The badge wasn't a shield. It was a blindfold. Let's talk about magic tricks. The kind where crucial evidence vanishes from secure lockers. Marty Smart's wife gave a statement implicating him. Where's that recording? Gone. The anonymous letter that detailed the crime. Misplaced for decades. The hammer Marty claimed was stolen. Never properly tested. The simulation suggests that some things didn't just get lost. They got erased. Someone in power pressed the delete button on the truth. They didn't want to solve the puzzle. They wanted to burn the pieces so no one else could try. Why protect two violent drifters like Marty and Bo? Follow the smoke. Follow the money. Ketty in the 80s wasn't just cabins and trees. Rumors say it was a transit point for narcotics. Were the neighbors just useful idiots for a larger operation? Protected species in a local ecosystem of corruption? If the police pulled the thread on Cabin 28, maybe the whole town's ugly sweater would unravel. The killers weren't ghosts. They were assets. And you don't burn your assets over a few broken wax figures. My perspective? This isn't a cold case. It's a frozen case, deliberately put on ice by the very people paid to solve it. The killer didn't just beat the victims, he beat the house. He walked away because the gatekeepers held the door open for him. The wax museum is closed now. The cabins are rotting. But the ticket takers who let the monster in are still driving new cars. The corruption didn't end in 1981. It just changed its address. In 2004, the simulation was deleted. Cabin 28 was demolished. Bulldozers came and chewed up the wood, the floorboards, and the secrets. They thought if they removed the stage, the play would end. But look at the figures. You can smash the house, but you can't evict the ghosts. The mannequins are still standing in the data of history, watching the rubble fall, waiting for a home that no longer exists. Physical destruction is not an exorcism. It's just a cover-up. What happened to the mechanics? Marty Smart died of cancer. Bo Bubade died shortly after. They exited the simulation peacefully. No handcuffs. No trial. No electric chair. They lived their lives while the broken dolls rotted in the ground. Is that justice? No. That is reality. In the noir world, the bad guys don't always get caught. Sometimes, they just get old. They took the truth to the grave, leaving us with nothing but theories and rust. The case of Ketty Cabin 28 remains open, unsolved, cold as the winter snow. But let me leave you with a final thought. The killer isn't just a man from 1981. He is a concept. He is the neighbor who watches you too closely. He is the silence in the room next door. The cabin is gone, but the woods are still there. And the woods are everywhere. Look out your window. Can you be sure that the display case is empty? This has been case file number 4, the Ketty murders. If you want to see more broken dolls, like and subscribe to X Crime Noir. I'll be here, in the dark, waiting for the next scream. Sleep well, if you can. Sound of light switch clicking off. Silence.
Case closed.